Hi, everyone, and welcome to Dentist Coffee Time. Today, we're going to go on a pretty fascinating journey to decode the hidden rules of beauty. We're going to trace a line all the way from the great masters of the Renaissance, through a pretty surprising story about a drawing class, and land right where we live, in the dental chair. We're going to see how the exact same principles that guide a sculptor's hand can and should guide ours. And by the end, we're going to have a solid answer to a huge question that I think every single one of us in this field has to face.
So what is it, really? Is the ability to create one of those smiles that just takes your breath away, is that pure, innate artistic talent? Some kind of magic that you're just born with? Or is it a science, a set of concrete, learnable rules and principles that you can study, practice, and master, just like anything else? This is the core debate, right? The tension between just having a good eye and actually knowing the rules. And today, we're going to unpack it.
Okay, so first things first. Before we can start talking about cracking any codes, we have to define what we're even talking about. What do we actually mean when we say the word beauty? I mean, how can you possibly study something that feels so personal, so subjective? Well, it turns out people have been trying to do exactly that for a very, very long time.
So the formal definition of aesthetics isn't about some vague feeling or good taste. It's actually a science. It's a whole field of study dedicated to systematically understanding the principles, the literal code that governs why our brains perceive something as beautiful. It treats beauty not as some random accident, but as a problem that can be understood and, well, solved.
So what is this science actually looking at? It's studying a very specific human experience. When our brain sees something and goes, wow, that's beautiful, what's really happening is that we are perceiving a state of deep harmony and balance. It's like a signal that everything is in its right place. It feels good. This tells us that beauty isn't just in the eye of the beholder. It's something engineered right into the structure of what we're looking at.
And this brings us to the two sides of the beauty coin, which is really interesting. On one hand, you've got subjective beauty. This is the stuff that changes all the time. Fashion trends, what was considered beautiful in the 1700s versus today. It's personal. But on the other side, you have this really tantalizing idea of objective beauty, the theory that some principles are just universal, that they can be measured, and that they're basically hardwired into all of us, no matter where or when we live.
For centuries, artists and thinkers have been completely obsessed with figuring out these universal rules. They were convinced that beauty wasn't an accident, but a formula just waiting to be discovered. And to find the source of that formula, that original code, we've got to go back to the people who first blended art and science like nobody else, the masters of the Renaissance.
Guys like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, they were so much more than artists. They were obsessive scientists, they were engineers, they were anatomists. They literally dissected bodies and did complex geometric analysis because they were trying to prove that the most incredible beauty followed a strict, often mathematical, code. They didn't just feel beauty, they were trying to reverse engineer it.
And they pretty much broke the code down into three classical pillars. First up, symmetry, creating that visual harmony between the left and right sides. Simple enough. Second, proportion, making sure all the little parts relate correctly to each other and to the big picture. And third, balance, arranging everything so that the whole thing feels stable and intentional, not just like a chaotic mess.
But here's the twist, and it's a huge one that every modern creator, especially us, has to deal with. While we're chasing symmetry, we also know that perfect, mirror image, robotic symmetry, it just feels weird. It feels unnatural. Think about it. Nature is almost never perfectly symmetrical. This leads to this idea of dynamic symmetry, where you intentionally introduce tiny, controlled asymmetries to make the result feel alive and organic, not like it was made by a machine.
So all these rules and codes can sound pretty abstract, right? How do you actually learn this stuff? Well, let me share a quick personal story that shows how the myth of just being born with talent is, well, it's just a myth. It shows that art, at its very core, is a learnable skill built on a foundation of science. I, like a lot of people, really believed that the ability to draw was just a gift. You either had it or you didn't. I certainly didn't. But then I took this summer drawing class that just completely blew that idea out of the water and showed me that the whole artistic process was way more systematic and scientific than I ever could have imagined.
The instructor didn't talk about our passion or our inspiration, not once. He gave us a method, a scientific procedure. We learned how to use our pencils to measure proportions accurately. We learned to analyze light and shadow like a physics problem. And most importantly, we learned to break down really complex objects into simple, underlying geometric shapes.
He taught us to see like scientists.
And get this, we didn't start with portraits or anything exciting. We started with a plain, white cube. That's it. The entire goal was to master the fundamentals of proportion and light on the most basic, boring form you can think of. The focus was 100% on scientific accuracy, not creativity.
So only after we really understood those principles on the cube did we get to move on to something way more complex, the human face. But the method was exactly the same. We didn't try to draw a nose or lips. We were trained to see a series of flat, geometric planes. We were basically deconstructing the face into its architectural components, like an engineer analyzing a building.
And then came the secret, the magic trick. Once that underlying structure was correct, once the proportions were right, and the light and shadow were accurately placed on those geometric planes, creating the final, realistic form was actually the easiest part. You just had to smooth the edges. The art didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was the logical result of getting the scientific foundation right first.
And this is the most crucial point of the whole story. My teacher was relentless about correcting the science, my proportions, my measurements, my values. Those were the objective, universal rules that could be taught and perfected. But he never, ever corrected my brush stroke, the unique way I put the charcoal on the paper. That, he said, is your personal style. That's your artistry. The science was universal. The final expression was all mine.
So, okay, a drawing class. What in the world does this have to do with the dental chair? Well, it has everything to do with it. Because this exact same principle of mastering the science to unlock the art applies directly and powerfully to what we do every single day in aesthetic dentistry. Composing a smile is fundamentally no different from composing a portrait. Think about it. An artist blocks out the geometric planes of a face to make sure the underlying structure is sound before they add any detail. What do? We do a diagnostic wax-up. It is the exact same thing. It's not just a model, it's our 3D architectural blueprint for the smile. It lets us build and verify that foundational structure before we ever touch a single tooth in the mouth.
The parallel is just undeniable. The words change, but the principles are universal. What art calls composition, we call smile design. What the artist obsesses over as light and shadow, we manage with tooth shape and texture. Sculpting line angles to reflect light, creating surface texture to make a restoration look alive. Proportion in art becomes tooth-to-face proportions in our world, often using the same golden ratio the Renaissance guys used. And the artist's balance? For us, that's the clinical importance of the facial midline and the occlusal plane. It's the same science, just on a living, breathing canvas.
So why is the smile such a critical and uniquely difficult aesthetic challenge? Well, because unlike a painting on a wall, it's dynamic, it's alive. The eyes and the mouth are the most captivating parts of the face precisely because they're always in motion. So designing a beautiful smile isn't about creating one perfect, static picture. It's about applying all those rules of composition to something that never, ever holds still. You're designing for emotion and for animation.
So what's our final conclusion here? Where does this journey leave us as modern aesthetic professionals? Well, for anyone who's dedicated to creating beautiful, lifelike work, it means we have to fully embrace a hybrid role. We have to be a fusion of two things at once.
Truly great aesthetic dentistry is a hybrid. It absolutely demands the analytical, methodical mind of a scientist to understand and master all those universal rules of proportion, symmetry, and balance. But it also requires the skilled, sensitive hand of an artist to apply those rules with nuance, to know exactly when to add that little bit of dynamic symmetry to make it look natural, and to impart that final, personal brushstroke that turns a technically correct case into a truly beautiful one. You know, maybe the most empowering idea to take away from all of this is that beauty isn't some untouchable, mysterious gift that only a few people get. It has a code. There are objective rules and principles that form its foundation. And just like learning to draw, it's a skill that can be studied, understood, and mastered. Our job isn't to wait for inspiration to strike. Our job is to become dedicated scientists who learn the code.
Which brings us to a final question for you. We've explored the universal rules and the objective science of all this today. But beyond that code, what does the concept of beauty mean to you personally, either in your work or in your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. This is Dentist Coffee Time. Bye-bye.